Hi. So we're going to take a closer look at the threshold experience now. This is part 2 of On the Threshold. I think it would be advantageous for you to know at this point that these shock points that lead into these threshold experiences are not positive or negative. They're universal happenings designed throughout history to move evolution forward. I'm going to read to you from one of my favorite spiritual books called I Am the Word, where they refer to in this book threshold experiences as trials. What a trial really is a set of circumstances that has been designed to light you up in order for you to dismantle the behaviors that created it to begin with. So if you have a certain kind of crisis in your life, you can put money on the fact that it may have been created by you at a higher level to move you beyond those issues that originally created it. We will tell you that when these things happen, your journey has an opportunity to make a jump start. It really is like you can take a big leap forward. Now, in most cases, trials present themselves when the need for change and the requirements for change and the mandates for change are such that the whole system needs a shift and the whole being needs to be propelled out of its comfort zone. This country right now is in a trial. And this trial is presenting itself as cultural magnification of everything that did not work for a very long time. The elements of greed, the elements of ownership, the elements of entitlement are all up for grabs right now as the paradigm shift in this new culture is changing. People believe in this country right now that everything will go back to normal in a year or two. And if that were to be the case, that would be a very sad thing, because this is about transformation and moving forward. It is not about amassing fortunes. It is not about people being deprived. It is about understanding who you are as consciousness. And this country right now is having to re-identify itself in its consciousness and therefore is in trial. The experiences of it, the things that happen to motivate change, are not always kind to the ego self or to the systems that have been created to protect it. So you understand this. When a trial occurs, everything that is encountered is about amassing an energy field that will create change. And that change will then provoke transformation to a higher level if this change is embarked on consciously and not in fear. So part of what they're saying there is that everything that is happening right now is about consciousness, and that consciousness is changing and expanding, and that in all of our lives now, it is about becoming more and more conscious to all aspects of our lives, more and more conscious to all events, all of our relationships, more conscious of our physical life, our physical self, our body, our emotional body, and our mind, everything. It's about bringing consciousness to that which is unconscious, as Jung would say. So consciousness in and of itself is the agent of change. It is the agent of any kind of growth and any kind of transformation. So for our purposes here, the expansion of consciousness means that we no longer see events as happening to us, like I just read, but by us at a higher level and for us. They are teaching events. And the teaching is that we are never a victim of those events. They are to wake us up. So we're being shocked daily now. Personally, you might be experiencing many shocks, many little mini shocks and mini threshold experiences. But as a culture, collectively, we are in one giant threshold leap. Formerly in our history, human beings would have maybe 1 or 2 shifts in a lifetime of any significance. Now, it's not like that. We are getting in touch with the fact that we are multidimensional beings, more and more, and our lives now we have multiple lifetimes in one life. Some say anywhere from 9 to 90, depending on how in touch we are with those multiple dimensions. So we're in a learning curve now, this kind of learning curve, okay? To understand how to navigate these threshold experiences, these transitional spaces, which are kind of in between spaces. So I'd like to do a little exercise with you now for you to experience what a threshold might feel like in a very small way, okay? So in a moment, not yet, I want you to know what you're going to be doing first, okay? I want you to, in a moment, I want you to stand up and leave your screen and go over to a doorway somewhere in your house. It could be a doorway between rooms. It could be a doorway to the outside, but just a doorway, okay? So you're going to stand up and walk over to that doorway. And you're going to walk slowly so that it's a conscious kind of progression, okay? And we're going to begin to step through the doorway. So the idea is that you take 1 foot forward through the doorway and then linger there in the doorway, leaving the other foot back on the other side. So that you actually have the experience of being in between the 2 rooms. Okay, so go ahead. I want you to stand up and walk over there. Good. Now, just take 1 foot and put it through, over the threshold, into another room. But the other foot is back in the first room. So you are not in either room. So that you can stay there for a moment and see if you can feel what it feels like to be between the 2 rooms. So 1 foot is back in the first room, which is a certain room, with a certain kind of sensory perception, you might say. And your other foot is in the other room, or perhaps outside, which is a completely different experience. See if you can just hover there in that transitional space. And then go ahead and take the back foot over. And you might want to turn around and come back again and see what that feels like. See what it feels like. And then come back. Come back. There is another word for these threshold experiences. It's kind of the subtitle of this part 2. And that word is liminality. That word is liminal space. Liminal, you can look this up. Liminal means in between, kind of nowhere, in the emptiness between one experience and another experience. It's like crossing, and hopefully you just had a little mini experience of this. It's like crossing an invisible border to a new land, to a whole different aesthetic sensory perception. Time kind of stops. You're just in the middle. I think the series, The Twilight Zone, was kind of that, between worlds and do-do-do-do. Twilight, actual twilight, is liminal space. Dawn is liminal space. Dawn, where the darkness is giving way to the light. Twilight, where the light is dissolving into the darkness. Liminal space between worlds. So in our everyday life, liminal space might be a mall at 4 a.m., an empty baseball field, stairwells, hallways. Have you ever gone to your high school reunion and visited your high school in July or August and walked down the hallways? It's very weird. Elevators, for sure. Liminal space. Tunnels. Those of you who live in Northern California or have ever been there, you, I'm sure, have gone through the Robin Williams Tunnel that goes between San Francisco and Marin County. So you come off the Golden Gate Bridge, and then there is this tunnel with a big rainbow over it. You go through the tunnel and you come out on the other side to Marin County. So on one side of San Francisco, completely that energy of San Francisco, and the other side is Marin County, a completely different energy. All waiting rooms are liminal space, like airports and doctors' offices, empty parking garage, and any doorway. It's kind of surreal. It's the betwixt and the between. Don Juan used to have Carlos Castaneda always look, or try to look, between the light and the shadow. Between the light and the shadow. Liminal space is addressed in anthropology. Indigenous peoples all over the world have rites of passage. It usually takes the form of often of a vision quest, and one of the main ones is at puberty, where the young person goes off into the wild as a child and comes back, hopefully, as an adult. It's considered essential in these cultures. The quality of experience completely changes for this person, and they come back transformed. We have passages also in our culture, but they're not very conscious. The teenage years are one big liminal space, one 4-year liminal space, okay? Marriage, divorce, moving, career changes, kids leaving home, retiring, eventually leaving the body, death. But in our culture, it's not really a rite of passage, R-I-T-E, because we are not very adept at that ritual. We don't have rituals for this. We're not that adept at transitioning. So even art has a whole genre called liminal art. And it's like spacious art. So there's one that I saw, this was in a movie, called Rabbit in the Snow. This giant white, all white, floor to ceiling, giant wide thing took up the whole wall. Rabbit in the Snow. It was just white. It had texture to it. No other color, no other hue, no shadows, no nothing. It was empty. And yet, it contained within it all potential, depending on the observer of the art. Joseph Campbell addressed liminality all the time in his process called the hero's journey. The hero in mythology enters this liminal space, this indeterminate world. It's an inner spiritual world we're talking about here, where old rules and former identities fall away. Usually the person has to meet all of their demons to get through, eventually finding the hidden treasure, which is self-knowledge. These passages, these liminal space passages, the hero's journey, is very potent for spiritual illumination and insight. The quest is for the pearl of beyond price. Liminal space is actually required as a seminal point of all creativity and spiritual development. This passage has to be gone through. So right now, collectively, we're on a hero's journey. We're in collective liminal space. We're between worlds. We're between dimensions. So I'm sure you can imagine now and even observe the kind of ambiguity this entails and the kind of uncertainty. It's very unsettling for people and very disorienting. It's kind of nowhere land, because all our former ways are being challenged and being changed. We can't go back. It's no longer an option. The Red Sea, remember the Red Sea? It's closed. And yet we don't know exactly how to move forward. So it is a twilight of sorts, of a dying existence. And we are on the brink of an emerging one that has not yet formed. So way back from quarantine, the beginning of the quarantine forward, this began a major liminal experience. Okay? We could call the lockdown quarantine period probably the Red Sea, right? Crossing through the Red Sea. But now we're facing the desert, which is a great unknown, isn't it? A quintessential liminal space. Deserts are. I live in the desert right now. That's what it feels like. That's what it seems like. Now, on the other side of this liminal space, there is the promise of, or the potential of, the New Jerusalem. But we have to go through the rite of passage. Let's not take 40 years. So liminal space basically is a letting go process. Letting go of old approaches, old roles, labels, belief systems, and positions that we've been clinging to, so that the new can come in, so that we can actually create it. because there's the possibility of such liberation here, such freedom here, freedom from all of our illusions and our false payoffs. Whenever there's a breakup of routine patterns, like the quarantine initiated, the brain, it disrupts the old neural pathways of the brain, and it opens up new ones. This is a good thing. This is actually a good thing. So the brain starts firing in new ways. And there's the promise now of a broader, much bigger, more expansive perception in life, a much deeper seeing, a much richer experience. And these passages are essential for our own transformation. So notice, since March of 2020, I don't know if it seems far away to you now or if it seems like it was yesterday, okay? But it was very abrupt. We were blindsided, more or less. Things started slowing down. The days started running together. Remember, there were a lot of jokes about that. You know, nobody knew what day it was. Time changed. The experience of time changed. I think people may have started marking time more in relation to nature, you know, like the sun and the moon, light and dark and the seasons, warm, cold, and maybe, hopefully, moved more into sync with nature itself. Now, also what happened was often a renewed connection or reconnection to family. People talked to their kids because they were home from school. And many realized the preciousness of those relationships and of that relatedness and that belongingness. Things got quieter. Remember driving down the street sometimes and you'd be the only one on the street? That's liminal space. Things got quieter. I think there was less attention on the exterior because basically nothing was happening. And some people drew inside then to a subtler experience of their quality, of their awareness, just unfolding, kind of like this, just slower, day by day. I'm sure we were all in the middle of things, and then it just stopped. So, most fought it. Few welcomed it, maybe. Most resisted it. Few invited it. Most hated it. Few relished it. Why? Why so few? I think because in liminal space, we are not in control. We weren't in control. Human beings have great resistance to not being in control or thinking that they are in control. So one of the overarching messages across the board in that experience and any liminal experience is to understand the subtle realization that we are not in control and we never were. It's a biggie. So it's just that it's always like that. But in liminality, it's kind of stark relief, you know, it stands out. So we are called then to let go, to surrender, to drop into this uncertainty, this not knowing, this mystery. And I'm sure you realize that most human beings don't live in mystery too well, living in not knowing. So a lot came up for people then and since, because we're still in it. Boredom, maybe. Restlessness, fear for sure. And not to make light at all of the loss, sadness and grief, depression, and the trauma. We commonly experienced tremendous vulnerability and fragility. So this does happen in liminality. Now, if we look at the Enneagram for a moment, we're just going to do a short look at 3 different groups, okay? There's a group called the Dutifuls, okay? Use the 1, the 2, and the 6. The Dutifuls. They are people that normally in life would be security focused. In liminality, and like in the quarantine, they probably were security obsessed. It gets magnified. Okay, then we go to the assertive types, okay? The 3, the 7, and the 8. Assertive types, they're the go-getters. Their tendency in life is to be they're doers, to be going really fast. So they're going to be running, possibly trying to escape the whole thing of liminality. They just want out. Okay, so they often might prematurely push the new reality. And in that, and in those 3 types anyway, is potential burnout. Then we have the withdrawal types, the 4, 5, and the 9. 4, 5, and the 9. Whole other group, okay? They tend to get inertia. They tend to get stuck, particularly in the past. And they may have experienced really just being in this kind of sludge, almost paralyzed, of not being able to move forward. So what happens in liminality most often is whatever we do already, we do more. Everything's exaggerated. Now, liminality does involve discomfort. It does. I mean, it's a special kind of suffering when we're not in control, or when we realize we're not in control. Even though suffering is the sandpaper of growing in this thing called incarnation in a body, so many, even now, may want to go back to sleep. But the fact is, we have turned a corner, a right angled corner. And you notice if you turn a corner like that and you look back, you can't see where you've been. Okay, you can only see as far as the corner. You can't see how you got to the corner. So that's where we are now. We've turned the corner. Complacency is no longer possible. We cannot just rest here and hope that things go back to normal. So how do we live then in this liminal space? How do we live in that threshold experience? So there are a few things we can actually look at that are real to this experience, okay? The first thing we have to realize is that basically in life, we are always on some kind of threshold. There's always a state of something falling away, or at least trying to fall away. And the new is not yet formed. If we pay attention, we are always in some kind of transitional state. You know how people they used to say to me in my work that they were in a transition. And even way back then, I used to think, well, welcome to planet Earth. We're always in transition. We are transitional beings. So that's the first thing to realize, threshold experience. that we're always actually on the threshold. Second thing, when we recognize that we are in uncharted territory, okay? We are in unknown territory. The second thing that we really must acknowledge and realize is that we're not in charge of the process in that space. We're not in charge of our unfoldment or the unfoldment of reality. Reality has its own way and pace of unfolding. And the third thing that's very useful here is that we can use this tunnel experience as actually that, like the birth canal, like the birthing experience. Okay? There's danger there. Yeah, there's danger in the birthing experience. But there is also this possibility of emerging into a bigger, more expansive, grander world. We can then relax into the flow of it, possibly, trusting in life's innate momentum. So this uncertainty, hanging out in this kind of uncertainty, requires, I think, one thing above all else. And that is the willingness to surrender, to let oneself just be, to drop into beingness. I think we are in the midst of a great being lesson, which is our true nature, beingness. The more beingness we experience, the more we find ourselves in liminal space. And the more spiritual one's life becomes. You could almost call spiritual liminal. Almost the same thing as far as experience goes. So the more committed a person is to their spiritual path, the more change becomes a constant. So the idea is to get really good at it, to get really good at living in liminal space, because maybe that's all there is. It is actually the essence of being here now, as we like to say. So this liminal space can become the most natural space to be in. We could even start to crave this space, this being unmoored from exterior events determining our reality, as Michael Singer calls it, the untethered experience or the untethered soul. So liminal space, we're saying then, is the reality of things. In that space lies all imagination, all creativity, and all inspiration. Ask any artist. It is the spiritual experience. It is the mystical experience. It is the most sacred space. It is holy ground. It's God's waiting room. Stay as long as you can. I'm sure Jesus hung out there. I'm sure Buddha hung out there, and every saint and mystic, and every great poet and artist hung out in liminal space. It is our calling now. And to quote a great poet, Rumi, this is called The Ocean. Late by myself, in the boat of myself, no light and no land anywhere. Cloud covered thick I try to stay just above the surface, yet I'm already under and living within the ocean. For sure, Rumi hung out in liminal space. Okay, that was part 2. There is a part 3, which is where we take the 9 temperaments and look much more closely at how they traverse a threshold experience, liminal space. Thank you. Namaste, always.